for this Lekgotla, dealing with anxiety and exam stress for kids at our schools. We've got a panel of members of this discussion, and I'm just going to introduce them to everybody quickly. To start with, we've got Robbie Brighton, who is the Deputy Head of Pastoral Care at BPS. We've got Wendy Hayskamp, who is the Girls Pastoral Care at KPS. We've got Bobby Warrener, who is a long-standing grade tutor at the college, and he is also the head of the GET phase at the college. We've got Patrick Thorpe, who is the Boys Head of Pastoral Care at KPS as well. And then we've got our two guests on this panel for this evening. The first one being Faith Kuta, who is a pro-care counsellor who practices here at the college as well. And then Dr Fikile Mabena, who is a paediatrician and a lecturer at the University of the Witwatersrand Academic Hospital. So the purpose of this is to discuss the topics of anxiety and dealing with exam stress. And most of these members of the panel deal with pastoral care. And pastoral care is really looking after the well-being of pupils within our care at the college and at the prep schools, and providing the necessary support for our pupils that we have care over. The order of events for this evening is that the presenters are going to speak about the topics that they've got experience in dealing with. But then towards the end, we're going to field questions posed by you who are watching from home. So please feel free to type in your questions online, and we'll field those questions towards the end of this panel discussion. So thank you, and I'm going to leave you in the hands of Robbie to get started.
Okay. Thank you, Rodney. Well, I think why this discussion is so important is if I just look at my own personal capacity as a Deputy Head of Pastoral Care, is that the role has changed so much in the 8 years that I've been doing it. Initially, when I started this role, it was very much focused just on the discipline and controlling the behavior of children. That's changed hugely within my role as a pastoral care. There's much more anxiety within children. There's children now in recent times that have gone through a pandemic. There's wars across borders, there's financial stresses, and all of this is impacting on the children. And I'm just finding that in my role as a pastoral care, working with children with this increased anxiety has totally changed. And that's the struggle I'm having within this job. And that's why I'm looking forward to this discussion tonight, and why I think it is such an important discussion. And to just hear your opinions and how your roles have changed within your school and what you're dealing with.
Yeah, if I can jump in there and share it's very similar sentiments. I don't think it's just you in the prep. I hear high schools teachers talking about some things that are very similar. And that's definitely, those are patterns that we've picked up in our prep school as well. Look, I don't think it's limited to the bubble we find ourselves in as a group of schools. I think it's pretty much endemic.
It's society. Yeah.
It's society. It's the anxiety the children are picking up on their parents. Like you said, all the stresses they're going through, the children feed off that. And I think the anxiety is seen in many ways in our school. There's the exam pressure. Grade sixes saying that they're anxious about the exams because they've got to get into a good university. That's huge for an 11-year-old, 12-year-old to deal with. And then you've got your social media anxiety. There's children that aren't even worried about exams because they're too worried about being kicked off certain groups, WhatsApp groups, social media groups. So I think little people today are dealing with big problems that they shouldn't have to carry.
Yeah, and sorry, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. So I just wanted to say to, obviously allude also to, some of the anxieties come from peers. So, in my experience of counseling, some of the learners, you'd find that there's a lot of pressures amongst each other. So there's a lot of challenges also in the school, interpersonally as they interact amongst friends, in addition to parents also adding some of the pressures on the learners as well.
And if we think about practical takeaways, I think for parents at this stage, a very basic one, but something that's also so powerful is to perhaps limit your anxiety and not project it onto your children, because that's a burden that they do carry, and it's not theirs to carry, is it? But I think there's a lot of conversations happening that children are privy to, and those sorts of anxieties they internalize, and they're just not old enough to be able to deal with them.
I think just jumping on a story that I heard. It was, I think it was the author Corrie Boom, who was part of World War II, her life through that. She became a famous author. And she said she was on a train with her father, and she turned to her dad and she said to him, "Dad, what is sex?" And she was 8. And he didn't answer her. And he was a watchmaker, and he had this very heavy suitcase that he carried around wherever he went. When they got to their station, he said, "Pick up the suitcase and carry it for me." And so she went to pick it up and said, "I can't, it's too heavy." And he said, "And that's what sex is for you right now. It's too heavy for you to carry. And when you're old enough, we'll talk about it." And I think parents need to know that there are some things that are too heavy for their kids. And we forget that. We have conversations thinking our children aren't listening to us, and they are. And they're picking every single thing up and internalizing it in their little brains.
Yeah, it might be very interesting for parents to hear that a lot of the conversations, but maybe not interesting as perhaps more scary, is that so many of the conversations happen at home, come to school.
Yeah.
And so we're not making this stuff up. This is genuine. They share it with one another, and we're not eavesdropping. It's what happens in class. We share, we have those conversations with one another. These are very real concerns children are bringing, and they got baggage that's just too heavy for them to bear.
I think you guys are lucky that they're sharing. By the time the kids get to high school, they start internalizing a lot of this. And that's where I think I'm seeing anxiety playing out in the college. The kids aren't going to share with their teachers, not going to share with an adult. They're now going to share with each other. And yeah, sometimes they may set each other off.
I think a big thing that's coming out for me here is, you know, in the same way that kids take so much from their parents, it's important for parents to manage their anxieties. I think to manage their stresses, you know, in all the basic ways that we all get taught, you know, exercise, manage stress, take time, you know. I think we multitask, we do too many things. Try and slow down, do one thing at a time, you know.
Yeah.
I think if parents did that a lot more, then kids learn from that, because they learn a lot more from watching us than from the stuff we say.
And it's important to also consider the context that parents find themselves in. So in a similar light that we wish parents also, you know, manage their own emotions and anxieties, we need to consider the context of most parents being retrenched after COVID, losing their jobs, you know, the future of their children's education also being uncertain, you know, providing for them financially. In some of the recent cases I've dealt with this, you know, children losing parents, you know, one or another, or a form of income from one or another parent. So, you know, it's important to also, you know, make parents aware that it's valid. What they feel and what they go through is also valid. And sometimes it could just be helpful to seek counseling also as adults. And just like you said, because children model from us, if adults can seek counseling, therapy is not a sign of weakness, it is a sign actually of strength. It's when you realize that I do need assistance, so that children can also model that as well. Yeah.
And I think what's important there as well is anxiety can be a good thing. It makes us aware in dangerous situations. It's good for us. It's when it becomes inhibiting, when it changes our life, that we need to worry. And I think having conversations with children to say, what does anxiety look like? What happens in your body? It's that dry mouth and your heartbeat racing and your sweaty hands. That's okay in certain situations because it makes us on edge. And you know, stress is helpful. We grow through our stresses. That's good. It's when it's not. And when it gets into our brain and our brain shuts down and there's chaos in our brain and we hit a blank and we can't concentrate, then it's a problem.
It becomes all consuming.
Yes, all consuming. And then we need to have tools to help them. Like, what do you do in that situation? When you feel that coming on, control your breathing. Try and reframe your thoughts. For so many of us, you get to that negative place and it just controls our head. If you can change that tape in your head to the positive, and if we can start doing that from a young age with children, hopefully by the time they're in the high school and they're sitting down to the exams, it's not a negative in their head.
I think those tools are so important. If you consider where your children are at currently, if they're in 6 and 7, they potentially have 15 10, 15 years left of studying. If they're in the high school, it's between 10 and 5, depending on what if studying is something that they want to do afterward. And so I think, yes, anxiety is a real thing. There's a lot of stresses, but there's also so much you can do to cope with anxiety. And I think we could probably speak to medication being a coping mechanism, but there's so much data and science that's pointing towards and validating the efficacy of obviously a balanced lifestyle, but something like meditation and breathing as a tool to neurologically help you balance, cope with your anxiety, and also as a tool of rejuvenation in moments of stress and heightened anxiety, having a meditation that you can go to or a breathing exercise that you can go to. The data is really pointing to how effective these can be, and not just for studying, but you know, you're going to carry these tools throughout life. And the sooner, I wish I was sort of introduced to it early on in my learning careers and when I studied. But I think the earlier on we can develop these healthy habits and make it part of our children's lifestyles. Can you imagine how effective they might be in a workspace later on? And you know, if they're finding exams as anxiety-ridden as they are now, you know, it's not necessarily going to get any easier in the workspace, is it? There's a lot of anxieties that we have to deal with and learn to cope with. And medication is definitely something that can help them, but is it a long-term fix that's going to keep them healthy forever? I don't know.
I suppose not so much as a long-term fix. It could be a short-term solution, but also to consider anxiety or normalizing anxiety rather, because what you've just alluded to are different life scenarios and you know, situations that we'll find ourselves in, meaning there's no end to situations that could trigger anxiety. So it's also important for learners and parents to normalize anxiety as part of their lives. And one thing that we often look at as part of mental health is the importance actually of movement. You know, we do talk of movement not only in terms of just physical exercising, but just taking a walk. You know, sometimes parents would force a child to study and focus on the maths exam, but actually sometimes if it's a child that's quite athletic and would rather want to do a run, maybe 20 minutes prior to coming to study, allow movement. So research has also indicated, you know, the huge role that movement contributes to not just anxiety, but mental health in general. So, you know, keeping the body moving one or another, it changes your you know, geographical location. If I move from here to there, I've changed how I see things. If I see the panelists from that angle, it's a different view. So there's many ways that movement plays a huge role.
And all the good hormones that benefit.
And you know, just in an exam, if you're sitting and you're writing an exam, you've almost hunched over your paper writing. Put your pen down and just stretch up and look up. There's movement. You've got a little bit of perspective, and you can carry on with what you're doing. It's so important to do that, especially when you feel the stress in an exam. Stop, take 2 minutes, count the lights. But it's in looking up that you're getting that movement, you're changing your body, your perspective, and it's so important. And it's a quick tool in an exam.
I think, Bobby, you had
I'm hearing a lot here, and I'm going, wow, it's great hearing, you know, professionals actually endorsing what I've seen over the last 20 years as a teacher at this college and 15 years as a grade tutor. And I'm going to talk sort of with two hats on here. I've got a daughter in high school at the moment. You've got a daughter in high school at the moment. So we can compare notes here. And then as a grade tutor, what I've noticed with parents and the do's and the don'ts, so to speak, during the exam time. So in terms of, you know, life happens, and I was hearing a lot of anxiety. We live in an anxious world. So the next 4 weeks is exam time. So if we've got stresses at home, now is maybe not the time as parents to be vocalizing those stresses. Let the kids go to school, then mom, dad sit down or have those difficult conversations with your boss or with your employees and things like that, out of the hearsay of our children. And then kids, you know, as a grade tutor, my dad says I'm not allowed to go to soccer practice, I'm not allowed to go to swimming practice now that it's exams or a month before exams. And quite honestly, it's probably the worst thing I can see happening to kids, because that is such a healthy environment for them to go and run off extra energy, get their bodies moving. I mean, Pat was saying, you know, or you were saying movement, Pat saying, you know, breathing techniques. Let's face it, the pool, the soccer field, socializing and being active is really, really needed. Patrick mentioned the word earlier on, it's balance. And that's also, it's that balance. So yeah, you don't have to go to soccer practice 5 times a week or 4 hours a day, 5 times a week, but go and play that football match, go and climb in the pool, go for that walk, go for that run. It's a really necessary thing. I remember when I was studying, I can't study for 2 or 3 hours solidly. You probably do it at a side, you know, you can study for 20 minutes and then actually your effectiveness is going to drop off. And that's as an adult, as sort of, you know, your grade 11, grade 12, you probably find your grade 5, 6, 7, 8 kids are only focusing for 10, 15 minutes. Then go and do a 5-minute walk the dog, you know, just
move.
Detach, move.
Yes.
Don't have an hour-long break. Take another 10-minute break, then get back and study again.
A break can't be in front of the screen.
Oh, that's something I want to chat about.
Well,
Everybody just screens. Oh,
Just before we,
Yeah.
sorry, just before we move off from anxiety, if we are going to, I just wanted to say, you know, it's important to obviously make a distinction between the anxieties that we're talking about, that we come across, that, you know, and anxiety inducing situations, and, you know, like you said, good anxiety that prepares us, and anxiety disorders.
oh yeah.
And this is obviously, you know, something that's important to just highlight, to say that, you know, when your anxiety now starts to interfere with your daily functioning, that, you know, it's important to get medical help for the child, you know, and that will involve both counseling and probably medication in certain instances. But I think it's an important distinction to make, that sometimes when we have made a diagnosis or have noticed that a child's anxiety is interfering with their daily living, it's important to get health care, and such that, you know, so that is taken care of, that is not something that, you know, movement, chatting will get, you know, will help with. Then we're dealing with a disorder, and then this probably will require more than just
Yeah,
more
so I suppose
intervention.
what we're referring to as
Is
anxiety
more-
is more
yes,
stress
more
related
stress,
to
yes,
exams
yeah.
and the context
Yeah.
of this time of
this
year,
time of the year.
rather than
Than an
as you
anxiety
say,
disorder.
correct.
I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think we want
Just-
to ignore that, and I'm
Yeah.
really glad you brought that up.
Yeah.
Faith, you also touched on it as well, because you said that seeking help is actually strength, seeking therapy is actually strength. And we still have that situation, particularly with our older children. I'm sure it happens in the high school as well, is that they get very good at masking. So they could be actually dealing with the disorder, because we're still living within that society where it isn't okay to not be okay. When we want it to not be there, we want it to be, it's okay not to be okay. And we see it a lot on social media, but we've got to break through that barrier where parents are okay to tell the school that their child is seeking help, so that we can form a
Get us
balance and
involved.
help that child. So I know you both brought that up, so I think that's very
I
important.
also just wanted to add to this the timing of that. So don't try the new medication just as you're starting exams.
Yeah.
You know, so if you're getting a anxiety medication, just as your child starts the exams, it could have a negative effect. You don't know how they're going to react to it. So perhaps do it a long time before the exams or afterwards, so it doesn't affect the way they operate.
I suppose, you know, this speaks to the medication being started by a healthcare
Yes,
professional, and not like oh, did that help you? Can I have some of that? You know, like from a friend. I think that's important.
You say that, and I've seen it happen in high school. So I've got a friend who's ADD, and so I'm not pretending to be another high school pupil. It's something that I've seen time and time again. And my friend's been on Ritalin and has been since grade 2 or grade 3. Now we've got a really, really difficult exam coming up. You're in grade 10 or grade 9, and you know that stuff you take, it helps you concentrate. Can I have some? Then the kid takes the medicine in the morning and sleeps because it's had a really adverse effect on them. They don't need it.
They didn't need it.
And now they literally zone out for that exam. and then the marks are far worse.
then-
And this is just kids kind of, that medicine makes people concentrate, so it'll help me concentrate.
Do you know what's even more
Bad
scary?
mistake.
Is the parents that are enabling that. So if you hear like in mothers groups, you know what, I managed to get Ritalin for my child, even though he's not ADD. I managed to get this for my child, even though he's not ADHD. So with the parents are enabling this use of medication that hasn't been prescribed. And it's something that really is very scary.
I think it's detrimental on more than one level. I think, when dealing with let's make an example of Ritalin, methylphenidate. The thing about it is and I'm speaking to that, but this applies to all other drugs. Before you prescribe a medication, you're going to look at, does this person have other conditions that might, that this drug is contraindicated to? So if, for example, you've got glaucoma as an example for Ritalin, you shouldn't be taking Ritalin at all. If you've got Tourette syndrome, you shouldn't be taking, but you might not have been diagnosed of those conditions yet. And nobody has checked you out. And now your friend is taking Ritalin, now you take Ritalin and you exacerbate a condition that you didn't know. Even side effects. I mean, we know that there's the common side effects of Ritalin, but the severe side effects, like cardiac problems, heart problems that children could get. You might not have been diagnosed, or it might be in your family, but you don't know about it, but you take Ritalin and then that exacerbates it because a doctor didn't check you out first to say, you have this condition, therefore you can't take Ritalin. So it's the side effects, it's the underlying conditions, but it's also drug interactions. There are some medication that you might be on that you shouldn't be taking Ritalin with. And it's a range of medication. Some of them are over-the-counter medication that people might be taking for colds and flus and whatever. And they are contraindicated to be taken together with Ritalin. So it's important that whenever you're taking medication, specifically speaking about Ritalin now, but any medication, that, there's a whole lot of checks that happen before you are given a particular medication. So taking it from somebody else is never a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, that was just an example. I've seen it now with children sharing their Concerta or their Ritalin. The other one that I've seen is kids that are taking anti-anxiety medicine. I don't know why Urbanol's popping into my head is one I've heard that's been taken. But and I'm sure if you've got a disorder, when it's at the correct dosage and that, it's a really great medicine to be taken. But when it's been misused, it's not the greatest time of year to be playing around with that type of stuff.
And it's never a time to use it, because it really is that serious. And I mean, speaking about Ritalin in particular, we've seen, I mean, it's something that's really started in varsity on campuses. And a lot of students have used it to study. They stay up longer. The problem with that is you actually are doing the opposite of what you want. You are probably staying up longer. You are cramming a lot of material, but because you're not resting and sleeping, you're not retaining the material. So you're cramming, and you might even pass the test, but you're not going to retain that knowledge. So if we are wanting to become people who are knowledgeable, education is not about that. It's not about passing tests. It's about getting knowledge and being a change maker, right? So you're not going to be able to retain any of that. So it really defeats the entire purpose.
I actually had in my notes here is like burning the candle at both ends and taking stimulants, something like coffee. If you're not used to it, is it advisable? You're in matric now, you're in grade 11, you used to going to bed at 10 o'clock. Is now the time to be staying up to matric, and coffee keeps you awake. It's a stimulant. Or with BioPlus. And these are things you get over the counter. Yeah, Monster or Red Bull. Are these stimulant drinks actually a clever idea? I'd actually say no. A routine is a better idea when you exam. If your body's used to going to bed at 10:30, stay with that. If you don't have an exam tomorrow morning, but you're used to getting up at 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning, get up at 5:30. Don't start sleeping in now, because that's going to cause more stress in your body. which creates a less conducive mind in which to study later on.
I wanted to pick up on something you said earlier about being mindful of what you're speaking to your kids about now during exam time. And it was something that one of our grade 7s brought to me. She said, my brother's writing matric, and it seems to be more important than me writing grade 7 exams. And so, yes, in the perspective it is, but in her world, her grade 7 exams are important. And she needed her parents to acknowledge that she needs just as much support as her brother that's in matric writing exams. So from a parent's perspective, try not minimalize what your child is saying. If your child is saying, oh, I'm stupid, oh, I'm silly, or I'm all the negative labels that come with anxiety, address it. Why are you feeling like this? I hear what you're saying. How can we change it? How can I help? Rather than minimalizing it.
It's interesting that when you were mentioning this, because in the presentation I did about a week ago on the same topic, I spoke on how parents are also going under examination during examination of the learners.
Yes.
Because also learners who might be listening also need to understand that parents are not experts in being parents. Neither are we experts in knowing how to support John or Sibusiso or Tandy. So it is a learning curve for every parent, and I also would not want us to be bashing parents in a similar light, because they could also be going through examination. So I think the questions parents could be asking, for instance, is, John, how can I assist you during your exams? What would you like mommy to do? And sometimes it could literally mean that you know, the workaholic dad takes just half a day from work to literally say, I want to be with you today as you prepare for exam tomorrow. What would you like daddy to do? If it means I should pick you up, for instance, or take you to school on this day, or can I go swimming with you so that you just de-stress and prepare for the accounting exam tomorrow? So we don't have the answers, and there's never a silver bullet. I must also highlight that. We could speak generically, but there's also, you know, we also need to consider those individuals who find examinations different to cope with. Strategies could also be different for different individuals. So we also need to consider that. In parenting, it doesn't come with a manual, I think we all know. So it's important to know, like Wendy alluded, if for, you know, the 3 children in the same house, writing exams, Peter, how would you like me to assist you for you in grade 11? And for the other one, how is your exam in grade 2? You know, so it's really just understanding that these are individual children, and parents are also going through exams. So I would also challenge parents to say, give yourself this opportunity, as at the end of it, you want to say, I actually went through my examination very well. I passed my examination of helping my child during the examination.
And I think that's so important. I often say to my boys, like, I haven't been a parent of an 18-year-old before. I'm going to mess up. And that's okay, as long as we have a conversation about it. And I think all of this is about having conversations with your children. Have the conversation that, you know what, I also get anxious about something that I've got to go through. This is what I do. And then your child thinks, okay, it's all right. You know, it's a normal feeling. If I have the conversation, if I breathe, if I have the positive thoughts, you know, it will work. Also, ask your child, the last time you felt like this, what did you do? How did it work out for you? What was the end result? Was it positive? Yes. Okay, well then let's go from there. You know, so continually having the positive spin on things is so good for the child to hear.
I think what we talking about is communication and connection. I think it's a golden thread that brings all of these things together, and it's really a foundation of the relationships that we have with one another. And I think a really implementable and practical takeaway, it might sound silly, but it's learning how to listen. And so many of us, especially when it comes to listening to a teenager who basically knows everything, and you watching them make these mistakes, the advice is there, but I think we don't create spaces where they feel safe to share with us. And so as soon as we turn onto advice giving mode, lecture mode, you have about 15 seconds before the eyes glaze over, and nothing after that is going to be retained. But I think a really practical tool is to listen for understanding, as opposed to listen to negate, to react, to give advice. And by doing that, you create a space of trust where they will come to you and they will then share with you. And if you're genuine in being curious about where they're coming from and want to understand, then those problems that you actually want to solve by giving them advice will organically right themselves. And I love what you talk about when you said support, because that again is such a simple question, but it's really powerful by saying, how can I support you? What does support to you look like? Because we all have our ideas of what we think support is. I might be thinking I'm supporting you by doing X, Y, and Z, whereas for the child, that's not what they see. And I think you do a couple of things when you ask that question. You get buy-in from them. How can I support you? They buy in. They come to the table, and there's accountability and agency because you're making a pact with them, right? And it's immediately engaging, and you have their buy-in there. I think those are really important. Just listening, learning to listen.
I mean, what I'm sort of getting at, if I'm a parent watching and hearing you talk, I mean, I'm hearing that breathing, movement, support, communication, these are important things. And one thing we haven't got to yet, though, is this social media or screen time. And I think that is so linked with anxiety. And I just, I'm aware of time. So I just, from my own personal experience and my dealings as a pastoral care, the biggest thing I'm just dealing with at the moment is actually with 11-year-old girls who happen to have devices. And it's not happening at school, the bullying or the anxiety or the feeling of being left out. It's happening at home across a device, whether it's on a computer or whether it's on their cell phone. And I can only imagine in a high school environment that devices and screen time has an equally counterproductive effect on the children. And that's something I just would be interested in hearing your thoughts in terms of screen time, because I'm battling with 11-year girls feeling of if they get left out of a WhatsApp group, that's enormous in their life. It's huge. And we need to protect them all as schools and as parents. We need to protect them from that, but it's there and it's happening. And for high school kids, that's something they have huge access to. And how do we sort of negate that during exam time and it's linked to stresses and that sort of thing?
Yeah, we actually had 2 interviews, pupil-led conferences with our grade 7s. We've been having those this week. And 2 of the grade 7s in the interviews with their parents said, I know that my cell phone is bad for me during exam time. Please, will you take it away from me? And, you know, it's about creating those, I think, again, a channel of communication, those expectations. It's just because we know what's good for us doesn't mean we're actually going to do it. So as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to studying or getting into the zone, cell phones need to be away from the premises. It can't be on your desk upside down, because as soon as that vibration goes, your attention span is gone.
Well,
it needs to be out of the room.
As an adult, I'm very unproductive.
Absolutely.
When I'm working and, oh, there's an email, oh, there's my phone going. You get a lot more work done when you're not connected. So, yeah, definitely. I don't think you should have your phone in your bedroom at night. Wi-Fi should literally be turned off at 11 o'clock at night. So your phone isn't beeping. And I've got a teenage daughter, and yeah, Robbie, that phone can ring, or not ring, but vibrate at 2 o'clock in the morning, and it's girls just chatting. It's not necessarily nasty, but why are you chatting at 2 o'clock in the morning? You should be sleeping.
In fact, they should actually, if they have their cell phone, half an hour before they go to bed, put it away, so that your mind can actually just calm down.
And that's something as a parent I can control. I can turn off Wi-Fi. I can say, right, phones are charged in the kitchen or in the study at night, not in our bedrooms.
And the same applies to gaming consoles. And I think during COVID, our teenagers connected on their consoles. So that was how they socialized. So now when they're taking their breaks, they want to go into their consoles to socialize. And to me, that's a big no-no. No screen time, and socialize in person. Socialize at the basketball court, socialize in the gym, socialize while exercising, not over a device. But it's easy for them because that's what they did in COVID. You know, we couldn't connect with anybody, so we did it online, and it's a pattern they've learned, and it's a behavior we've got to kind of unlearn.
I suppose that's why it's important to have a consultative approach, with children, so that our conversations are sort of child-centered. I understand that sometimes we want to, be the parents who are like, I know what I'm doing, I've been there before, but you actually don't know how to parent Michael. Michael is a different breed, born in a COVID context. You were not, you didn't experience that, in a technological era also. So those factors are quite important. I know parents are not therapists, they don't have the, much of the skills in terms of questioning, but I would challenge them to have a goal-centered approach, especially with teenagers that might otherwise have behavioral challenges or defiant challenges. It's not every teenager when you switch off the Wi-Fi and they're cool. They've got airtime, they can still put on data.
Yeah.
But it might also be important to
You're wise to
so there's many aspects to beat around the system.
Yeah.
However, I'd encourage parents, like Patrick alluded, communication. Be contextual. Yes, during COVID, we allowed it based on these factors because even learning was pretty much online. How are you coping now post-COVID with your phone, for instance? And like I said, when we normalize things, when we make mental health a lifestyle, we also teach our teenagers to say, it's important for your mental health to actually have the 30 minutes before you sleep to yourself, where it's not social media that influences your thoughts, but it is yourself. So to also agree to you that we don't start new things, we don't start new approaches and new ways of doing things now that is examination. I think when we do that, we then make examinations too Grandier. We actually create anxiety of examination over and above what they should be. But if we have normalized in their lifestyle that every day before we sleep, this is what we do, then examinations become part of the process.
You were speaking about meditation earlier, and I think, speaking about phones and all of that, sometimes we speak to them, we should be speaking to our kids more, and and listening more, like Mr. Thorpe has said. And I think it's important, and my train of thought is running away with me. I wanted to speak specifically about mindfulness. You were talking about, because you spoke about meditation. So I was thinking about doing one thing at a time. So with social media, I think to emphasize, I've got a few tricks that I help myself, because I think I'm a social media sufferer as well. I have to limit myself. I switch off my Facebook and WhatsApp during the week so that I can function. I don't have them on my phone. I don't have notifications on my phone, because so if you send me messages, I'll see them when I see them. I don't have a constant beep, 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 beep. So all those tricks we can teach and speak to our kids about that, because then you focus on one thing at a time. You're not on your phone and on the laptop, and like that mindfulness is so important. And I think that's another creator of anxiety, is trying to be and do too many things all at once. So just be in one place, do one thing, finish. And I think, our culture has been that as a multitasker, you are lauded. But, a multitasker actually doesn't achieve that, quality. You're not actually producing quality
We're now
work.
studying. We're now doing this. We're now doing that.
Focus
Let's
on
focus
this. Focus on this and finish this. So I think it's something we all can learn from, even as adults.
And I think that's also what feeds into children that need to be perfect, this effortless perfection. Look at me, I can multitask. And look at me, I can multitask well. And this whole sense of having to be perfect in every area of their life. Someone I spoke to, I said, what is your anxiety with exams? It was an adult, and her response was, my need to be perfect. She said her need to be perfect in exams overrode her sense of failure. She wasn't even worried about failing. She needed to be perfect. And I said, but that's not attainable in the exam. But it's what drives so many children as well. They, and another staff member I spoke to, she said she was a high achiever, 95% all the time. And her dad always used to say to her, so what happened to the other 5%? And it's the joke. Oh, what happened to the other 5%? She took it on, and she had to be perfect because her dad said to her, where's the other 5%?
But it was a
It's a
misinterpretation
misinterpretation.
potentially.
He was joking
Wow.
with her.
Yeah.
And for her, all through school, she had to get that other 5%.
And that's the one rule of thumb is laud the effort and not
the
the result,
result.
right? Because you're fixing them into a mindset of I am my result, as opposed to let's go through the process of learning.
I had a high school teacher who would always say, you are not your marks. And I must say, throughout high school, I didn't understand what she was saying. Because I was like, I'm getting great marks. I am those marks.
Yeah.
Until I got to varsity.
And I think we also
And I
need to-
needed to understand that I'm not my marks.
we need to be realistic about, at the end of the day, kids are writing an exam. But this is not life and death. This is just a set of exams. If the wheels fall off, well, you're at school. You can do it again. It's not being in a really focused life and death. You as a doctor, if you're involved in a surgery and you make a mistake, that's going to have deathly consequences or dire. This is just an exam. So it costs you a rewrite or, oh, well, I've got to redo it. It's not the end of the
I
world.
think that perspective is very important,
It's
and particularly low down at primary school where our grade 5s are starting the first time around. Again, the marks are really not the most important thing. This is an opportunity to have that little bit of stress, prepare for it, and do the best that you can. And if you have perspective on the grade 5 marks, because none of us sitting around here will remember what we got for grade 5, and we need to remember that. Do you remember? So they were obviously good.
So I also, just on to what Patrick said, is that in corporate today, everyone has the academics. They're actually looking for the soft skills. What did you learn through it? Did you have any grit? Have you got tenacity? Where's your perseverance? That is what corporate is looking for. And so it's the journey.
The
with
self-awareness,
exams.
the self-awareness, knowing, how do you normally do during the year, and it kills that idea of perfection. Because if I am Tandy and I've been getting 45%, it will be important to set your goals to be quite realistic. So maybe in the exam, you set something within your range, and not put yourself under pressure to, sort of work over and above your capacity. Because we also have seen, I think, over the years, children committing suicide because of exam stress or, having mental breakdowns and others really blacking out. And we also see this in counseling where some clients come and they're anxious because my dad said, if I do this, I'm going to get this much, or I'm going to get this gift, or I'm going to go on this holiday. So it might also be important for parents to just minimize some of these sort of expectations.
Yeah. Look, I think high school kids, it's different to prep school kids. So I can only contextualize this in a high school environment. But, kids need to be realistic too. If you've been getting D's and C's all year, the chances of you getting A's in the exam are very, very slim. If you've done very little work all year, a whole year's worth of work, you're not going to fix that a week before the exams, the night before the exam. So your goals being realistic, you've got to work to them. Actually, see, there's a question that's come through from the parents here. Are there any techniques or tools that parents and learners can utilize in dealing with stress about exam results and the future? So techniques and tools here. So you've got a future, you're working towards that future. You've got to set those goals. You've got to fill up your toolbox. You've got to do the reading. You've got to do the work throughout the year. So if you know you've made a mistake in the exams this year and the marks aren't what you need, well, let's, chat to a teacher, chat to the school counselor, chat to your parents, chat to professionals about, well, where to from here. I mean, if your goal is to get into a specific course at university, you're in grade 11 now, you don't get the marks you need to get into that course, well, fix it in matric, then reapply. You might need to do a more general degree, or you might need to redo a 1 or 2 subjects, but you'll get to your goal if that's your goal. And there's a lot of advice out there how to fix errors that have been made along the way.
I think it's also important that there is a direct route of doing something, but there is also another route to do it.
Yeah.
So have a plan B. We're striving for plan A. We want to get our results. Maybe our results are not what we expected. So what was plan B? and even have a plan C so that you are managing. If you are just going in with plan A and your results aren't what you want it to be, then you're going to have an awful down. If you have plan B and plan C, you can adapt.
I think that's, I think that speaks to agency.
Yes.
Because so often our stress or our anxiety comes from because we don't feel like we can do anything. So I think a really good skill there is learning to control the controllables. And that's a skill that you can apply anywhere at any time. Because that stress comes from, what can I do? Can I do anything? No, you want to be able to do something, but you feel like you can't. So learning to control those controllables and set really realistic parameters, but then also sort of working backwards. So much of our goal setting, our healthy routines and our habits aren't developed by self-discipline or willpower. I mean, a lot of data is coming out to say that self-discipline and willpower is actually a limited belief, and that so much of our success in our routines, our healthy habits, and achieving our goals is actually developed through our environment and the controllables within our environment. So if 80% is what you want to achieve, I think we've got to get very specific. So you want to do well in an exam, you identify what does well look like for you. It's 80%. If it is, it's going to be different for every child. For the child who hasn't worked throughout the year and they've been sitting with a C or a D, then perhaps 60 or 70. But then to identify and then use the environment to scaffold for that success. So we have to get really specific for those goals. If success is 65% for you, what do you need to do to get that 65%? What does a 65% work ethic look like? Identify that. Is it 10 or 15 hours? And again, it's going to be different for every child. 15 hours. What does that 15 hours look like? Because 15 hours straight is very different to 15 hours in five blocks, 45 minutes each. You want quality over quantity. And if you planned for 15 hours to study for an exam and it happens 2 days before, you plan to fail, because that first hour is going to be efficient and you've wasted 14. So I think it's then about saying, right, what do those 15 hours of successful study look like? Break them down into bite-sized chunks, 45 minutes, 15 minutes off. And then what does that environment look like that is going to enable that success? And it's not going to be an environment with distractions in it. What is a distraction? Well, where are you studying? Are you studying in the living room? Probably not a good place to study. So let's change our environment to equip ourselves for success and bring ourselves into a room that's quiet. What are your distractions in the room? Is there a phone? Get the phone out. Is there a TV? Remove the remote and put it somewhere in an inconvenient place, because chances are you're not going to go searching for the remote if it's inconvenient. What's in the fridge? Is there a lot of things in the fridge that's going to spike your blood sugar levels and help not assist you in your concentration? Clean out the fridge, make sure, create the environment that is going to enable you to make those goals that you've now made very specific, achievable, and that's ultimately.
I also think at the same time, when you're saying, it's like telling someone to calm down when they're angry, they're not going to suddenly calm down. The same thing, you can't just tell someone stop stressing about it. All children stress about their results and their future. It's quite natural. Again, it's managing that. And it's being okay to have a little bit of stress around your future and your exams, but keep them realistic and keep your expectations realistic.
But I suppose also,
sorry, go ahead.
Okay, so I suppose because the question is twofold, there's the part of parents asking what are the techniques or tools, and also to add on what Patrick said in terms of the openness of questions, because I think the questions you're asking were pretty much open-ended. So parents could also just ask open-ended questions. I would suggest a pre and post sitting with their child, and let this not be a promise thing or a meeting where you set expectations. If you do this, I will buy you this, or if you do this, I'll upgrade your phone. But let it rather be an emotional conversation about how would you feel if you get the marks that you wish or that you've set for yourself. Let it not be how would you feel if you get 100%, no, but how would you feel if you get the marks that you got, and how would you feel if you didn't get the marks that you had set for yourself? What would you like mom to do differently? What would you like dad to do differently? How would you want us to support you? That's pre. And post the exam, because it speaks, she's alluding or he's alluding to exam results. So how do you deal with the stress? So it's again an emotional conversation about it, to say, how do you feel now that you've gotten these results, were these the results you had hoped for? What can you do better? What can you do differently? Because sometimes the assumption that the child wants to do better could actually be a parent-centered, but maybe it's an open-ended in that how would you have done it differently? So it allows the child to say better or
Sue, got another question that's directed for you, Dr. Mabena. But what advice can you give learners who use energy drinks to keep them awake while studying for exams? I think they want to hear from a medical about the impact.
And I think a big answer to that second question are all in the first one. I think, unfortunately, there are no shortcuts, and often when we are using, whether it's the energy drinks or medication from a friend, it's really us trying to say, oh, I didn't prepare and I need to be at a certain place and I've only got this little time to get there. Unfortunately, the trick is start earlier, start at the beginning of the year, do the work, put in the hours, get all the tools to get you ready, because unfortunately the energy drink isn't going to do it. As I mentioned, whether it's the energy drink or the drugs, if you stay awake, you can cram the work, but you're not going to retain it. You're kind of exchanging your short-term for your long-term memory. You're crammed just to pass the exam, but you're not retaining the knowledge. And I'm hoping we are wanting to learn, right? To be change makers later, to actually shape our world. That's why we are at school. We are wanting to not just cram and pass a test. We're wanting to be people of value. It's not just about exams. We are wanting to be of value. And if you want to be of value, you have to retain the knowledge so that you're able to do the things that you need to do. It's not just about getting 90% on a piece of paper. It's more than that.
Yeah, what that does do is interfere with REM and sleep. And if there's one thing that if it weren't natural, should be a drug or performance enhancing drug, it would be sleep. It is so important. I think, I don't know what recommended sleep dosage is for a young adult, but at least 8 hours. And don't develop a routine so that you're getting those 8 hours, because it is the drug enhancer. Sleep is the drug enhancer. It's really important.
You can't underestimate the value of sleep. And I think that's a message to both children and adults. I think we need sleep to recharge. There's so many benefits of sleep. I mean, I'm getting into a lot of reading on rest and sleep and the importance of it. And I think we can't underestimate it.
And because sleep also is not an isolated part of our lives, I normally recommend what I call the ESE. So you eat right. So obviously your diet being good and balanced, because I'm sure as a doctor, you might have experienced a lot of eating disorders, which could also affect sleeping patterns. So I recommend ESE, which is eating right and ensuring that it's quite balanced, because that can influence your sleeping pattern. So when you sleep right, also it does affect how you would probably eat. And the other E would be exercising, because with good exercising, again, movement, it does enhance the child's ability or even adults' ability to actually sleep well. So it's not just, the advice also I suppose goes to us as adults, that the ESE, so you eat, sleep, and exercise. So, the three combined could actually give the results.
And that's what you should be doing, like what you said earlier, all the time, not just at exams. So it's
model this
as way of life.
There's no quick fix. This needs to
There's
be
no
habit.
quick fix.
Exactly.
That routine.
I think that leaves us just for me to thank the panel for that discussion. I really appreciate it. And for our two guests, Faith and Dr. Mabena, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, everybody. I think this has been really enlightening for our parents and everybody watching. So we thank you for your time, and we're closing off.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.